facilities tomorrow?
I'm going to be at CISA too, so I'll be able to. I'm hoping to.
Okay. We got it. To have of the actual committee going forward, so that would be a problem. One of the things that you need to, they usually set their meetings for the year, and that, so if there are different, I think it might be posted. So if there are
I'd like to call this evening's meeting
schedule different
of the Stoughton Area School District Board of Education to order. Becky, could you please call the roll?
Yes. President Dirks?
Here.
Mr. Bouvan?
Here.
Mr. Coughlin?
Here.
Mr. Fry?
Here.
Ms. Fitzgibbon? Here. Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Ms. Roberts excused? Ms. Sword?
Here.
Ms. Carpinian?
Here.
Isabel Genter?
All right, thank you. At this point in the meeting, we would entertain any public comment. If there are any members of the public who would like to address the board, please come on up to the podium. Not seeing any takers. Okay. Next up, legislative update.
I don't have a lot. I know we've probably got some stuff to talk about, but just, I think we talked about this last time. The Assembly passed their education plan bill the day after we met last, which is inserting themselves legislatively into the ESSA plan that we've got for DPI. We'll hear more about that. The Trump administration rolled back the school lunch rules that we had put into place, so we'll find out how that affects us, but haven't had a chance to talk with our food service to see if we're just going to we can still locally have our own policies. The Assembly passed a bill that fines families that are using state assistance if their kids don't attend school regularly, and so that's going to be going to the Senate next. I'll let you know what happens with that. And there is a bill right now being floated around that subjects school construction projects to competitive bidding. I don't know what our policy is offhand. I believe up to a certain amount we don't have to go to competitive bidding. Is that correct?
So, yeah.
But if it passes, school districts would also have to follow that, and it could be a pretty low number. So that affects us, I think, our local businesses that we give work to. Also, the Senate Republicans approved an Assembly bill that rolled back child labor regulations, which is about workers' permits at 16 and 17. So I believe now that they don't need to have a parent's signature. Is that correct?
I don't know.
For workers' permits. And there is a Senator Larson and Representative Sinicki are trying to get someone to sponsor legislation called Community Schools Act, which would be more of a wraparound service that provides services, physical, mental health care, after school care, academic mentoring, and family support, which I think any district would love to have. And if it passes, it would have some funds attached to it to help start something up. I'll keep you posted on that.
Thank you.
And that's all I've got.
All right, thank you. Tim, District Administrator report.
Just got one thing, well, a couple things. First of all is remember that our honors night is Wednesday, which is the night that we give away scholarships, local scholarships to our graduating senior class. And so it's a great event, and so that's Wednesday the 17th. And then that means graduation is right around the corner, June 4th, I think it is, that Sunday. So those are two great events that are happening that we get to celebrate the success of our senior class. This is also the night that I am pleased and excited to announce some innovation grants that we are awarded. If you remember, we started this program 3 or 4 years ago of investing in our own staff, of giving our staff an opportunity to submit ideas that are aligned to our strategic plan and investing in their ideas. We had a lot of great applications, and just because the applications didn't receive an innovation grant doesn't mean that we may not be supporting them through a building budget because it was more appropriate along those avenues, or expanding some other things. So pleased to announce some of the, our innovation grants for next year. The first one is a collaborative teaching space at the high school. The high school team of Julie Lynch, Laura Striley, Anna Schwecke, and Kathy Gargano submitted an application for a collaborative teaching space and have been approved in the amount of $13,000 with a goal to improve student achievement across all content areas and across all student groups, to close the achievement gap and to increase student engagement and learning. The space they will create will be an inviting and comfortable with multi-purpose use by staff and students during school and after school. The multi-purpose room will include various types of furniture, including leather chairs, collaborative seating, storage, bookshelves, artwork, and mood lighting. 5 to 7 copies of various books will also be purchased to be used in literature circles. Essentially, they'll create a space that will increase the reading culture at Stoughton High School. It's a space that classrooms can go in, teachers can bring their classrooms, the English department can use it again for literature circles. They can be used after school for various groups. So we're excited to have them create this space. The second grant is a creative writing innovative classroom with flexible seating at River Bluff. The River Bluff team of Abby Alt and Mike Hensigan submitted an application for a creative writing innovative classroom with flexible seating and have been approved in the amount of $21,200. With the goal to improve student achievement across all content areas, across all student groups, and close the achievement gap and increase student engagement and learning. They will transform 2 6th grade language arts classrooms into creative writing spaces where personalized learning curriculum is designed to allow students to work at their own level and pace and to show their work using choice options. Each of the 2 language arts rooms will have 6 flexible seating zones, colorful palettes that maximize student learning and stimulates participation, soft lighting, and educational phrases sayings on the wall. They are going along the route of the personalized learning and creating the space in order to help them accomplish that. The next couple investments, that also next year we're going to be investing funds to grow some of our 16-17 innovation grants and to take them to the next level. We will allocate roughly $25,000 to fund the implementation and training of staff to expand the Kaganza Kindergarten play-based, inquiry-based learning system and the 5th grade student-centered learning programs at Fox to the other buildings. These funds will cover training costs and allow our staff to visit other schools so that they can implement those programs in the other elementary schools. And then lastly, we are going to be investing in Kaganza to help them begin their journey to make the entire school an inquiry-based learning school, taking what they're doing in kindergarten and expanding it to the entire school. Working with the Innovation Schools Network, Kaganza will launch a 12-person professional learning cohort of teachers interested in collectively deepening their understanding of innovation and inquiry, and will begin to implement student-centered practices throughout the school at multiple grade levels. So taking what we're doing, the inquiry-based in kindergarten, and expanding it school-wide. And so those are the 4 investments and 4 areas that we are doing. One of those is an expansion of last year's, which is exciting, which is what we wanted to see when we started this several years ago, of taking our best ideas, the ones that are really working, and expanding it. That is in addition to the innovation grant this year that Fonda Lewis had, that was incorporating mindfulness and that into the classroom. And in part of her innovation grant, she's offering training opportunities for our staff so that they can then incorporate those practices into their own classrooms.
All right, very good. Any questions about any of that from anyone? Board members, as you know, our last regular meeting on May 1st, it turns out it was not recorded as it was supposed to have been. so there's no podcast that anybody can view. Tim did send out an email regarding that, but maybe for the benefit of the public, if you could go over that.
Yeah, there was with the kind of the reorg meeting and the multiple times that we've met kind of and back to back, because we had a reorg meeting and then we had the following week, et cetera, miscommunication or something that it was not recorded. So we have put things into place. We have verified our meetings that was set at the annual meeting with WSTO. In fact, they are broadcasting now and streaming now, so we appreciate their help and support. We have included them on our correspondence out when we post the agenda so that they know the agenda. We have put into place processes and procedures so that we confirm with them that they are going to be taping, and how do we work at the next level, and also having some preliminary conversations with Paul and the team of if they can't make it, are we able to stream without them? Right now we use their equipment to stream, and so we piggyback off their signal on their taping, and that's how we stream on our YouTube channel.
So this shouldn't happen again is the bottom line.
Correct.
And I do want to apologize to the public. This certainly wasn't planned that way. We don't know where the confusion came from, but it is certainly our intent that those who can't or choose not to actually be here physically for meetings can at least see the meetings either live or as a podcast. And hopefully this isn't going to happen again. With that, then, the consent agenda, please.
Approval of the April 20th, 2017 Committee of the Whole Council meeting minutes, the April 24, 2017 reorganization meeting minutes, and the May 1st, 2017 regular meeting minutes. Move approval of the April 27th through May 10th, 2017 check register and May 10th, 2017 P-card transaction report as presented. Move to approve budget revision reductions to library aid in the amount of $9,678 and the corresponding expenses and to reduce idea flow through grant in the amount of $18,393 and the corresponding budget totaling $28,071 and approved budget transfer in the amount of $2,734 for building and department budgets. We'd like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donation to the district. $18,000 from Faith Community Foundation for the Teresa Inn Memorial Nursing Scholarship. $1,000 from Stoughton High School Parent Group for scholarships. $500 from UW Health for Senior Scholarship. $50 from Janet Nelson for the Margaret Larson RN Healthcare Scholarship. $50 from Kent and Helen Carver for the Margaret Larson RN Healthcare Scholarship. Rare Earth Permanent Magnet from Brett Schumacher valued at $20 for Stoughton High School Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math classes. Topsoil purchased and delivered for the Fox Prairie Elementary School garden from Stoughton Rotary Club valued at $500. Compost purchased and delivered to Fox Prairie Elementary School garden from Moyer's Landscaping Service valued at $100. And related donation budget adjustment for $19,600. We would also like to thank the following individuals and businesses for their support of the high school prom. Asleson, BBG's, Big Sky, ColorCon Inc., Culver's, Dick's, Diamond Direct, El Rio Grande, Fosdale's, Giggles, Hanson Electronics, Radio Shack, Jimmy John's, Level Up, Lotus Salon, Main Street Kitchen, Malabar, McLean Pharmacy, McFarland State Bank, Next Generation, Papa Murphy's, Pick and Save, Pizza Pit, Smith Photography, Spinner's Pizza, Story Inn, Stoughton Garden Center, Stoughton Lumber, Stoughton Floral Subway, Thane B. Anderson DDS, Ultrazone Laser Tag, UPS Store, Viking Lanes, Walmart, Yeti's Pizza, Yahara Dental, Michael's Frozen Custard, Heirloom Floral, Stoughton Yoga, and Firefly. I move approval of administrator resignation of Daniel Holzauer, effective at the end of the 2016-2017 school year. I move approval of professional educator resignation of Lisa Gucci, Sarah Dow, Dave Table, and Jacqueline Ford, effective at the end of the 2016-17 school year. And I move approval of professional educator contract for Molly Reedy, Emily Hunt, and Daniel Holzharder for the 2017-2018 school year. Sorry for the pronunciation.
The consent agenda has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Steve seconds it. Are there any discussion? I'll just take this up. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you?
So the letters of resignation, are they, so, were they offered a contract and just chose not to sign it? Because there was one I was reading, saying that they won't be accepting their contract. So I'm just trying to understand what the difference is.
They must have gotten an offer in a different district and took that instead.
Any other questions? I'll just take this opportunity to highlight something that, I mean, it's on every consent agenda, but this one particularly struck me. If you look at the businesses that helped fund the prom, that's like 3 dozen businesses in town. We've got our scholarship night, honors night coming up day after tomorrow, and there are several donations right here for scholarships, and that happens every week. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this is just an excellent example of the community partnerships that the district has and the support that we get from all different corners of the district. Any other discussion? All in favor of the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the consent agenda is approved. Do we have any committee reports tonight?
I would just say that tonight the Wellness Subcommittee met
Oh.
and made a recommendation to the Policy Committee for the updates to the wellness policy. So you should be seeing that in June.
Thank you. Allison, did you want to say anything about finance tonight?
Yeah, Finance Committee tonight, we talked about our agenda for the next year's meetings, kind of our tentative agenda, as well as setting meeting dates, which we will keep on the before the second board meeting on Monday nights, starting at 6. The other big discussion tonight was discussing a potential option for our the way we operate our school bus system. We are one of the few districts that still maintains our own buses, and our drivers are employees of our district. We've looked at a potential contract with Nelson's, which is who we buy our buses from. And there was quite a bit of discussion, really not enough time to really talk about all the issues surrounding all that. So we will take it up at a board meeting, either the 5th or the 12th. It kind of depends where that's going to fall, in June, for a little bit more discussion and hopefully get a little bit more information. Today, Erica did talk to the drivers so that they are aware of what was on our discussion for tonight. So, but that is going to be coming. It's a major change if we decide to do it. So.
Questions, John?
Yeah, you mentioned more consideration at a board meeting. Is that a school board meeting or a committee meeting?
School board meeting, because we're feeling like we need to come to some kind of a decision, but it was hard to vote to move it out of committee with what information we had.
Okay.
Yeah, if I understood, and Erica, maybe you can chime in, I think there's some immediacy to making a decision, is that correct?
We would just need some direction so that we know what we're going to do moving into the next school year. So, and I mean, all the planning for that happens over the summer months.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can certainly talk more about the timelines and why we are where we are right now, given a lot of different circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about that? All right, thank you. Well, as Allison said, I expect we're going to see that on an agenda soon, almost certainly next month. So next up is discussion items, and the only one that we have calendared for tonight is handbook recommendations, and I'm not sure who was going to walk us through that. Was that
Becky.
Becky? Okay.
In coordination with Mike, jumped
Okay.
on one part of it.
And maybe, Mike, if you could stand up. I don't think everybody here knows you.
Well, and actually, we're going to have Mike speak to you first so that
Oh,
we can
good.
kind of honor his time. So I just want to precede this with, there was one item as the Employee Relations Committee reviewed the recommendations or the suggestions for handbook that we felt we needed more information on, and we felt if we needed more information, it might be beneficial for the whole board to also hear it. So we have asked Mike Jelka, he is with Boardman and Clark, he is the attorney that represents the district most often. We've had a long-standing history with Mike, so we have asked him to come tonight to just give you some information about Just Cause. Because what I will tell you is that in the suggestions from the staff, what they wrote is that they said, I'd like to see the just cause and due process for termination clarified so it is more specific on the fair and legal processes. And then it also ends with, I would like to see actual just cause in the handbook. That's where we had some confusion as to what they were even meaning by that. I did reach out, there were only 3 people that suggested that, and I believe it was probably something recommended for them to suggest because all 3 of those came in identically written. So I think it was a cut and paste. I did reach out to some of them to ask what they meant by that, and I didn't get any response. So with that, we're just going to ask Mike to inform all of us, and I just thought it would be better for him to do it first thing, then he doesn't have to sit around and wait until we get to that portion. If that's okay with you?
Yeah,
So, Mike.
that's fine, thanks. And maybe before we start, Becky, do you know where in the materials in Neptune we should be looking if people want to follow along?
The portion that I am going to be...
Well, maybe the just cause thing.
Mike is handing that out now.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Well, I'm not, hopefully that, what I'm handing out is just some outline of my prepared remarks for that. And yeah, thank you very much for having me here. One of the things I learned in preparing this is that there was a just cause case in the district that I handled back in 1999. So this is not a new issue, as you might expect. But if you're prepared or willing to do so, and follow along with this outline, I think that would be most beneficial. An employee handbook is designed to lay out, for the benefit of employees, different procedures and expectations that may be relevant to them in their respective roles in the district. And we've really put a lot of emphasis on the employee handbook since Act 10 passed because of the fact that no longer are there collective bargaining agreements, which then mean that whereas before collective bargaining agreements laid out wages, hours, and working conditions, now collective bargaining agreements simply have base wages. So the handbook takes on a greater preeminence. And so what I thought I'd do is just walk through some of this about just cause and then answer any questions. In Wisconsin, there is absent something in a handbook that would set up a standard such as just cause or such as good and sufficient cause or whatever other standard you might have for discipline or termination. In Wisconsin, the legal presumption is that every employee is what's called at will. And that means the employee serves at the will of the employer, meaning the employer can discipline or terminate the employee for any reason or no reason at all, as long as the reason is not illegal. But also the employee then can depart and leave the district for any reason or no reason at all, with or without notice at any time. So that's the presumption that is applicable to all employees in the district. Well, with all employees in Wisconsin. Then what you have are, if you have policies or handbook provisions or statutes or contracts that set up standards for discipline or termination, then those policies or handbook provisions, statutes, or contracts take precedence over that at will and make it so that that's not as free-flowing as at will is, where the employer has all the options and the employee has all the options. So if there are standards in handbooks, and there are, generally there are standards in almost all handbooks of one sort or another. Very few handbooks are just governed solely by at-will relationships. So I represent, or I work with, about 80 school districts, and so in that regard, I'm pretty familiar with handbooks and what's in them. And it is very common for there to be standards in handbooks. And as I have in Roman 2b there, the most important element of any standard, no matter what words you use, the most important element is the definition of that standard. What do you mean when you say good and sufficient cause? What do you mean by good and sufficient reason? What do you mean by just cause? What do you mean by arbitrary and capricious? What do those words mean? And any standard really has two components to it when you get right down to it. One of is the idea that there's going to be some substantive rights that the employees have. The idea is that an employee is not at will, cannot be terminated or discharged for any reason or no reason at all. There need to be some substantive rights as to what that employee can expect in terms of something that would precede discipline or discharge. And then there's also procedural fairness that's embedded in, whether explicit or implicit. Whenever you have a standard, there's an element of fairness. The idea is that the employer is to be fair in the treatment of all employees under whatever that particular standard is. So let's focus on just cause, because that's what I was asked to address. And I think it's fair to say that there's no one that will tell you that there is a single definition of just cause. So, Becky, I don't know what you read, actual just cause, or okay, I deal with just cause all the time. I would not know what that means. So the fact that Becky doesn't know, the fact that she reached out and it wasn't clear in the responses that she got as to exactly what that meant, that is not surprising, because there literally is no definition of just cause. And I think that's what makes the whole issue kind of one that needs to be addressed. And just to give some context to that, the 1999 arbitration award that we had here in the district involved a teacher transfer issue, and there it was that the sentence in the collective bargaining agreement at the time said that a teacher shall not be transferred without just cause. And so the idea there was it was outside of discipline or termination. It had to do with transfers. So again, the whole concept is one that is fairly esoteric. But as you can see in Roman 3b, the essence of the just cause principle is the requirement that an employer must have some demonstrable reason for imposing discipline. In other words, there needs to be some some reason for whatever action that's likely to be taken. The most prominent influence on the concept of just cause was labor law. And of course, labor law, that's collective bargaining. That's Chapter 11170. That's everything that preceded Act 10. And one of the things that first emanated from labor law in the private sector and in the public sector was this concept of the 7 tests for just cause. And I've outlined them here. This is by a famous arbitrator named Doherty. But if you'll notice the underlining that I've done in the 7 tests, you'll notice that every one of them is did the employer, or was the employer, did the employer, was the employer. They're all related to the concept of what the employer's obligations are when disciplining or discharging an employee. And so, and that's reflected in paragraph D on page 2. The 7 tests are actually tests of employer conduct rather than employee conduct. And so there was, over time, even in the labor context, okay, even in the labor law context, there was a rejection of just cause by arbitrators. And the most prominent rejection was a case down in Johnson Creek, where if you just bear with me here, I'm going to read this paragraph, that the Doherty 7-test analysis was devised in a blue-collar setting and is inappropriate to a case involving a professional employee who must exercise judgment based upon professional training and years of experience. Strict application of the analysis as to how a teacher fulfills his or her responsibilities, quote, can only serve to denigrate the teacher's mission. That arbitrator, who was very well respected, Sherwood Malman, kind of turned things in Wisconsin in 1994 as to whether the 7 tests were going to be prominent in school districts or not. And in fact, what it did is it made arbitrators, when they had discipline or discharge cases that were governed by just cause, just the statement, there shall not be discipline or discharge without just cause. Unless the 7 tests were enumerated in the collective bargaining agreement, arbitrators got away from applying those 7 tests because of Malamud's analysis that showed that this came from an entirely different setting and really put the employer more as the employer conduct than the employee's conduct. Then the labor law interpretation of just cause ultimately then came down to a 2-step analysis. And again, we're in labor law now. That's not what we're in now. We're in employment relations now because we're in a post-Act 10. But prior to Act 10, what evolved then, when the 7 tests more or less were discredited, what you had was a 2-part test. Did the employer establish that the employee engaged in conduct in which the employer has a disciplinary interest? Meaning, you know, is it true that the employee did something that it impacts the employer? And then secondly, did the employer establish that the discipline imposed reasonably reflects its disciplinary interest? In other words, was the discipline reasonable? Was the termination reasonable under the circumstance? So although the emphasis shifted away from analyzing the employer's conduct, it still left the burden of proof on employers. And so in any context where you're talking about discipline of employees, the burden of proof is always on the employer. It's not up to the employee to prove that he or she didn't do something. It's up to the employer in any standard, basically, to prove that the employee did do something, and that whatever is going to be imposed is fair under the circumstance. Post-Act 10 just cause, I can say confidently, and that very few districts have maintained any reference to just cause because it is a labor relations term. It is not an employment relations term. It has its root in labor relations. Act 10 changed that. It is no longer a term that is in employee handbooks in the state. I try to think of another district that I know that has just cause, and don't hold me to this. I'm sure some of our clients maybe reference it, but I could not come up with one right off the top in preparation for this. And I note here that if reference is made to just cause, it's really critical that a specific definition of that term be generated in the employee relations context, not revert back to this labor relations context. You really need to define it in an employee. You're dealing now in a much different context when you're talking about employee relations rather than labor relations. So then what I did, and I'm going to conclude with the Stoughton Area School District application of just cause, and I think, Scott, this goes to your point about where in the handbook is this. There is just cause mentioned in the non-renewal of non-administrative staff. That's in section 50.35, and there is a definition there. And that definition says that just cause is defined as a reason which has a reasonable basis in fact, and which, when appropriate, takes into account 2 other sections, which I'll mention in a minute. Also, just cause is mentioned in the discipline or termination of professional educator section, and it has the exact same definition. So to the extent that your handbook uses the term just cause, it also then defines it very very clearly as to what exactly it is that's intended. And in addition, in section 50.45, there are examples of the kinds of reasons that would constitute just cause for termination. So it's laid out in some detail as to what would be examples of the kind of conduct by somebody that would constitute just cause. Now, that's just looking at the definition, but I'm very impressed by your handbook in this regard, and that is the other additional provisions that are applicable to just cause. I mean, your handbook gives it context, all right? If you look at the fact that your handbook provides that the district can't take any action that'll have an adverse effect upon the professional staff member's contract without providing due process. Well, due process is fairness. That's what due process is. It's fairness. It's a fair process. And so to the extent that you do define just cause the way you do, but you also then have an obligation to treat somebody fair with regard to the fact that a staff member being aware of any charges, time to prepare, have an opportunity to hear the charges, and give her his or her side of the story. In addition, if there's an investigation of staff misconduct, section 5050 applies, and there you're going to see, if you look at it, you'll see that there are protocols that apply directly to the kind of investigation and the sequencing of investigation. Very much procedurally oriented toward giving a process to that staff member of fairness, a process of fairness. So not only is there due process, but there's fairness in the investigation. There's also a section in 100.15 that calls for corrective action when it's appropriate, meaning that discipline and discharge are not always the first line of decision making whenever you're dealing with an employee who may really simply need remediation. There may be a desire to have the employee change behavior, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it through discipline or through discharge. You might be able to put a corrective action plan in place. You might a performance improvement plan, something that would remediate that conduct. Again, very impressive to me as part of the fairness procedural piece of this. And then lastly, and certainly not least, is that the terms in your handbook of discipline and employee termination are subject to the grievance procedure, which also includes a hearing before an impartial hearing officer. So to the extent that there would be a teacher who would feel aggrieved, or an employee who would feel aggrieved by either discipline or termination, that employee has a legal right under the statutes, but then you also have incorporated that into your handbook, a right to grieve that and have it go at different stages to an impartial hearing officer for review. So I guess from my standpoint, not sure what actual just cause is, but I think that if you're going to stay with just cause in your handbook, the way you've captured it and the procedures that you've surrounded it with and the fairness principles that you've allocated to it, I think make it a workable concept in the district. I think it is an employee relations concept rather than a labor relations, and that's would be my first point. And the fact that you've got a definition really helps in the context of both the employees knowing what it is that just cause constitutes, and you and your employers, Becky and Tim and so on, know what it is as well, so they know what the standard is when they apply it. So that's kind of the summary that I would envision that would be hopefully helpful to you as you go forward with this. Are there any questions?
John?
Yeah.
So you said that most of the districts that you work with do not have or do not consider just cause in terms of disciplining employees?
Correct.
Do you, off the top of your head, have any examples of how other districts might handle managing discipline or outlining disciplinary procedures for employees?
Well, very few go into the kind of detail about outlining the procedures that yours do, okay? Some have what they call progressive discipline in the handbook that would be very similar to your corrective action concept. They actually outline progressive discipline as a matter of principle, not as a matter of mandate, but they'll outline oral warning, verbal warning, a written warning, letter of reprimand, and so on. But they make it very clear that certain conduct can skip all that right to some other more pronounced kind of discipline. So some handbooks do have progressive discipline in them. Others don't have the kind of investment in the procedures that yours do. But they'll have a standard. It might be arbitrary and capricious. It might say that no action with regard to discipline or termination shall be arbitrary or capricious. That's a lesser standard. Generally, it speaks in terms of whether or not the action of the employer was wholly irrational. Those are the words, wholly irrational. That's very common. I would say that's by far the most common standard in handbooks. And then some have good and sufficient reason. Some just say good reason. I mean, you can put any words there you want, as long as everybody kind of, as long as people know what it means. That's the key. If you don't know what it means, you're putting the employee at a disadvantage and you're putting the employer at a disadvantage. You need to know what the words mean. So I don't know if I've been helpful in terms of answer.
Yeah, that helps.
Anyone else?
I have a question. I don't know, probably it's for Becky. Who's present during an investigation, or who hears in an investigation during the time that an employee is being disciplined or something?
Well, the investigation would be different from the discipline. So
Oh.
if you look at the steps, the first thing that would occur would be the investigation. And I generally am working with the supervisor. So that could be a principal, it could be a principal and assistant principal. If it's a custodian, it might be one of those supervisors. And we are then meeting with the employee that has the allegations being brought against them. And oftentimes they have a representative with them. So those would be the people in the meeting or meetings that we would go through the investigation with. Then, right, so there'd be the investigation. Then you have a time when you present to the employee what we conclude, what we feel we heard, what our conclusions are, and what we would be recommending ultimately to Tim. And that would be the same, could be the same group of people. If it's really serious, you might have, Mike might be there, you might have an attorney there. If it's someone in a bargaining unit, they might have someone from their state representation come in. So there might be more people involved. Well, actually, there could be more people involved all the way through this, but those are kind of the core people that I described. And
Let me just add one other thing, and that is because the other aspect of an investigation is it's not always just an interview of the person who's alleged to have engaged in the misconduct. There ultimately are, a lot of times there are witnesses that may be involved. There may be other people who you would consider to be less than, say, first-hand witness, but people who somebody has told about something or whatever. So the whole point of an investigation is to be as thorough as you can possibly be to get it right. That's the key, is you just want to get it right. You're not out with a presupposition as to where you're headed. You're just trying to get it right. You want to get it right because that's the fair thing to do. I didn't mean to interrupt, but that's important. I think is that there are also witnesses, so it's not just the victim or whoever, if there is a victim or whatever, and then the other person, going like this. You're doing an expansive work.
Okay.
Other questions? Allison?
When you were talking about at-will employment, you were saying that for the employer, they maintain the ability to let the person go for whatever reason or no reason, and that the employee can leave whenever they want. So if there's not at-will employment, we're assuming there's a contract?
Well,
Or
you're assuming there's some kind of standard like we're talking about.
Some kind of a standard.
Yeah, right, exactly. And what I noted in the outline I skipped over is that where there's a contract for a term, like the administrators have or the teachers have, where they have a contract for a fixed term, typically, even if it's not stated, that is not considered at-will employment during that term. So a lot of, I should say a lot, many of our clients for school districts, when it comes to non-renewal, they consider the non-renewal to be an at-will period of time. Once somebody has fulfilled the entire term of the contract, then the non-renewal can be for any reason or no reason at all. That's what school districts certainly do now in a post-Act 10 environment. You don't do that. You still have just cause for that non-renewal, and that, so even there would not be considered at-will.
All right. It just seems kind of an unbalanced agreement to me. You know, it just, when you look at something like that, if the employer can get rid of you for any reason, it's not really the same. It's tough without a contract to, and I realize we do still operate under a contract, but when you operate in that kind of a system, it's really difficult for the employee to really have any right at all. And so in then saying that just cause came out of blue collar environment, therefore it doesn't apply to a professional standard, that really doesn't kind of make any sense to me. I don't see why you can't have something that came from a blue collar context that does not apply to other labor situations.
Well, and that's a good point. Remember, it's not that just cause wouldn't apply in a professional situation. It's that the 7 tests, those 7 tests are geared more toward a blue-collar labor environment, and that's pretty much become very well accepted because of the nature of the kind of cases that came out of. It never intended to suggest that just cause in a labor context now. Remember, that's a labor context. Just cause has other definitions in a labor context. I show how it evolved into a 2-part test. Okay, but just cause really doesn't have that same, it doesn't have that same bearing or meaning in an employment relations context, and that's what school districts are in now in Wisconsin. They're not in a labor context anymore. So that's the adjustment that needs to be made. Now, I'm not here to talk about or advocate for anything, but I'm certainly not here to advocate for at-will, okay, if that's what your concern is. I think what I'm doing is praising where you are in the total picture of, sure, you have a just cause concept, but it's well-defined, and you've got all this surrounding fairness that goes with it, that I'm, frankly, I think that ought to give employees an awful lot of assurance.
Okay.
Other questions from anybody?
So, yeah,
Tim.
maybe this is for Becky. So would this apply to this process, or whatever, apply to a teacher or a staff member, quite frankly, who is deemed to be underperforming based on evaluations? Is that considered disciplinary action if?
Well,
They were to
it
get-
may lead to disciplinary action, but I think what you're describing, probably the first step would be an improvement plan.
Okay.
So most likely there would not be discipline.
So who decides if it's a proven plan is that, is there a?
It's generally the same group of people that I mentioned to Yoli about, they're listening and making a decision, and then the recommendation is to Tim that we feel that this person, if we would put them on an improvement plan, then we're giving them a chance. We do that most of the time.
That is a judgment, though, and that can't be taken lightly, because there are some people, and I'll just speak from my experience, nothing to do with Stoughton at all, but in my experience, there are some people who, when they were hired, it just wasn't realized that they just weren't a good fit, okay? If somebody just isn't a good fit with regard to coworkers or a culture of a district, or any of you who've been athletes and in a locker room, the climate in a locker room, if there just isn't a good fit, a remediation plan generally is just not a good idea for either party. It's better to face up to the fact that that employee may be very successful somewhere else, where that fit would be much more compatible.
Other questions from anybody? I know that this is a topic that has come up a lot over the years, and it comes up every year that we consider the handbook revisions, and we do that every year. I don't know that we've had Mike here to field questions on just cause before, so I'm not going to say this is your last chance to ask, but now's a good time to ask.
And I can tell you, I haven't been here to field questions
Yeah.
on, so.
I guess I'd be asking somebody to speculate, but we don't have any idea what people mean when they say they would like real just cause then. Is that sort of the
Like-
bottom line that we're,
This document that was in your packet, it indicated the number of employees that made that request. There were 3 employees, and I'll tell you, all 3 of them were educators. And I did reach out to 2 of them at least, and no one could tell me what they
Yeah.
meant by that.
and I've been on the board for a few years, and we've heard that from the union rep from time to time, that they would like real just cause, but nobody's ever defined that for me either. And I would like to understand what it means. So,
Yeah, and unfortunately, I started by saying, I don't know what it means either. I've been doing this for 41 years, so.
I guess the problem I'm having though is that somebody is unhappy with what we've got, and I would like to understand why or what we could do, if anything. But I don't, because it hasn't been made clear.
Right, if they won't tell us, it certainly doesn't make sense for us to try to guess.
No, we can't guess.
Yeah.
But we have improved the standard, as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Our initial handbook was based on good and sufficient cause.
Okay.
And we changed that to just cause and gave that definition. So I believe that we were responsive to a lot of the comments at that time.
And that goes back to what you were saying before, Mike, that we're the only district, as far as you're aware right now, or at least as far as you can remember, we're the only district that you represent that has this in their employee handbook.
It has those 2 words.
Yeah.
Right. There may be definitions that are very similar to the way you've defined it, but it just isn't a concept anymore. And I think, to go to your question about what does it mean, it isn't a concept anymore because we're in such a different environment. It was very critical concept when labor relations, what we're all about. But it's just fallen out of having relevance, I guess is what I would say. That's the general principle, if nothing else.
Well, I guess a follow-up for me then would be, I'm glad that we have that language in there, but because of all that you've just said, is it very meaningful that we do?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
Good.
because of the way you've defined it.
okay.
Yes.
Well, and then too, there are 11 enumerated examples of possible reasons constituting just cause for termination. Again, I'm, not to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing that most districts don't do that sort of thing.
Well, that's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. It's very common in handbooks to have an enumeration of the kinds of reasons that would constitute reasons for termination. They just don't necessarily have a standard like that associated with it.
Okay.
They'll talk about the expectations of conduct of employees, and then they'll say that variations from the conduct can result in discipline, and here are some of the enumerated things that if you do, you're going to be disciplined or possibly terminated.
Thank you.
So, one more, admittedly, I was surprised how few staff members commented. Is that typical? Is that a typical response rate?
I would say since when the handbook was first implemented, there were a lot of comments, a lot of feedback. And I would say over time, that seems to lessen every year. So yes, this is less than what we received last year, but last year's was less than what we received the year before.
And some of that, if I could just pipe in again from a more global perspective, some of that is as the impact of Act 10 has become more and more accepted, and in ways where districts have not overreached with the power that they now have, where districts have demonstrated fairness with regard to their employees and so on, there's less concern. The jolt of Act 10 raised a tremendous amount of concern that would have also then raised issues about whenever the handbook would have deviated from the bargaining agreement. But now, once you've demonstrated the fairness that really goes with an employment relationship, once you've demonstrated that, there's going to be less, because people are comfortable and they can rely on they have a sense of reliance. That's not an absolute answer, but I guarantee you that's a cultural shift.
And I mean, I guess I'm just, you look at the possibility, I mean, yeah, there's the fairness, and hopefully we're doing that, but you can see the potential is always there for it to not be fair, and I'm not saying that's us.
And that's why
But
there's a
that's
grievance
concerning.
procedure. That's why there's a grievance procedure, is because somebody who feels that the handbook has not been complied with then has the right to file a grievance, which includes a step that involves the impartial hearing officer, and ultimately comes back, if it's appealed, ultimately comes back to the board. So there is recourse that would then be very tied into the handbook and so on. Point well said.
Others? Okay, well, thanks
All right,
very much.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yes, you bet.
All right, I was trying to figure out the best way to do this because you did get multiple documents. So I think what I did is, if we're going to go through the one that's up on the screen,
Okay.
and what I'm going to do, they're in order of how they appear in the handbook, but then I will let you know why that's there. So I'll read off the list if it was something from a staff member or if it was an administrative request, so at least you know where it's coming from. All right, so the first one was section 2035, and this was an administrative, bless you. This is an administrative suggestion, and we would like to add to the National Board Certification speech and language pathologists. If they obtain that, they would also get the $1,500 that they would get annually. So it's expanding that section. I'm just going to keep rolling unless you interrupt me.
Yeah,
How's
so
that?
just so everyone's clear on process, the recommended changes are the highlighted sections, correct?
Yes, and you know, Scott, when you said that too, I should maybe even back up further. We did collect we put out information, I put it out and sent out reminders multiple times for staff to give us any suggestions or revisions that they'd want to see in the handbook. Then all of that information was reviewed by the Employee Relations Committee. And that took quite a while for the Employee Relations Committee to go through all of that, talk about all of that. And so I would also say, with the exception of that just cause piece, because that's where we just weren't felt educated enough to have a decision on that, but the rest of what you're seeing here is now coming out as a recommendation from the Employee Relations Committee. So that's why this came about, and so if you're going to see sections where I will say we decided not to do anything, well, the we in that would be the Employee Relations Committee. All right, B is 30.10, the employee workday, and if you go and look at, we would like to make the days longer on Wednesdays. Professional educators stay Wednesdays for staff meetings and collaboration. They also have time identified with early release days and professional development days. And educational assistants work one Wednesday a month, and that is for in-servicing and collaboration. We would like to extend that time to 4:30, not meaning that we would always keep them to 4:30, but there have been times, especially on professional development days, where if we are having someone come in to the district to present some information, they often have their materials set up in an 8-hour day, or sometimes it can be split, and it's 2 4-hour sessions, and they end up rotating. So it would work better if the day went to 4:30. So we did recommend that. There was a staff member, one staff member, that asked for clarification about meetings outside of the regular work hours. As a ERC committee, we felt that it did specify when those meetings can be called, and that we would let people know ahead of time if there was going to be additional requirements.
And I'll just say, if anybody has questions about anything, it's probably best to ask them as we're going along rather than waiting to the end, because there's a lot here.
Okay, the next one is section 30.40, lunch breaks. That's an administrative recommendation, and it's simply the word may. Will means they have to, and we are flexible with some of our staff. If they work a 5-hour shift, if an EA works a 5-hour shift, they may not take a lunch. And they would, most of them would, if they prefer not to, we're okay with that, because again, they're done that much sooner. Some of our administrative assistants may not take a complete lunch break. So we just wanted to have the flexibility that if people wanted that flexibility with their lunchtime, that would be a may. Oh, yes, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, then 30.85 on-call procedures. That is an administrative recommendation, and this is simply something new that was not in the handbook before. This is primarily for our maintenance staff and some of our custodians. It's when the alarm system goes off, and they are paid for that. It used to be that fell totally on the custodial supervisor and the buildings and grounds director, and they were getting called to come in almost every weekend, and so it's been on a rotational basis, so it's really identifying what we're doing. 40.45, accident and injury reporting, that's administrative also, and that is simply updating that section because we have a new carrier and we have a slightly different process. So it's identifying what they need to do with risk administrative services. F, absence reporting, that is administrative, and it's at the very end of that section. It is something that we expect, but we think it would help us to put this in writing. When staff are out for jury duty or bereavement leave or meetings that are in or out of the district, we would like them to put that time into employee access. That doesn't charge them any time, but it gives us a record of who is or isn't in the district, and it's more of a safety concern. If we had a fire and we were trying to figure out who was here or not here, if they're not putting in that they're out for jury duty, we might be looking for them. So it is what we're expecting right now, but it would just help us to reference this when people forget to put it in.
So you say it's what you expect right now. I'm assuming some people are not doing it. And
Right.
That's the reason it's
Right.
here, and there will be repercussions, I guess, eventually if people don't
Well,
do this over time.
I mean, things like this is, again, because it's safety, it's just a reminder, and it just gives us a little more strength in what we say when we say, you know, it is part of the handbook, we want you to just put it in employee access. I don't think there'd be repercussions necessarily unless there's blatant disregard for putting in any kind of time.
Okay.
The request for transfer, again, that's administrative, and it's simply because the we can address has changed. Okay, so now the non-renewal and staff reductions, that was the section that I referred to before Mike started, and that was brought forward by 3 people, and it was about the just cause, and what I've highlighted in blue is just demonstrating to you the language that we do have.
So you're not recommending changes?
Well, I was going to say, the Employee Relations Committee didn't recommend a change, but in all fairness, I would say we were also waiting to hear, have some learning around this, but it was not our intent to change it as a result of that meeting. Okay, I is sick leave, and there was an employee, there was one employee, it was an EA, who requested that okay, 10.5-month employees can accumulate for retirement payout 100 days. 12-month employees can accumulate 120 days at retirement for a payout. This employee was suggesting that it be 120 for everybody. And the Employee Relations Committee didn't agree with that, so we didn't do anything with that employee comment. But administratively, we did make the change as far as proration. And where this comes into effect is that people are given time per day. So their sick days are based on the number of hours that they work. So I'm said to work an 8-hour day. So my sick time is worth 8 hours. And most EAs work a 7-hour day, so their sick day is worth 7 hours. If you have a half-time EA, their day is worth 3.5 hours. Well, where this got a little confusing is we have some employees, and it's mostly EAs, where maybe this year they have added onto their schedule 10 minutes to ride the bus with a student or to be outside a little bit longer because someone needs some extra attention. To calculate all of that time and add on those 10 extra minutes, we just simply don't do that. That EA who's working the extra 10 minutes, they're given written notice that it's a temporary assignment to add those pieces on. But when they take sick time, they're paid at 7 hours, and that's what their deduction would be as well. So it's not the 7 hours and 10 minutes. But again, it's temporary. If this would be added on to somebody on an ongoing forever basis, then that would be different.
Becky, sorry.
Yes.
But can you explain, the employee saying that some of us near retirement have more than 100 days accumulated. So
Sure.
what does exactly mean?
Sure. Over time, you can accumulate more of your time and your sick time. And that's primarily because we don't have a short-term disability. So if you would have to go out for a period of time before you were eligible for long-term disability, we want you to have enough time to be paid. So you can accumulate your sick time. What they're saying is, I accumulated all this time, but yet when I retire, as an EA, let's say, when I retire, the district only pays me 100 of those days, and maybe I have 130 of those days, and they're only getting paid out the 100. So it is a budgetary concern, and it is, it's consistent across the board, 10.5 and 12 months. It's either 100 days or 120 days. Is that it?
Thank you.
Okay, personal leave. First of all, we had an employee that asked, last year, the whole column that gives the 4 days, we have had 2 personal days. Last year, we added 3 and 4 personal days for the length of time that they were in the district. So that was new last year. We had an employee say, we'll give it to everybody all the time. And the Employee Relations Committee feels that this is really a nice way to reward people who have been here longer. The longer you're here, the more personal days you do get. So we did not agree that that should be to everybody. And it was 3 employees that said that asked for that.
Becky, is it another spot where you talk about, we are recommending to make a change that no more than 2 days can be taken
Yep,
consecutively?
well, no, it's in this spot. I'm just getting to, those would be the administrative suggestions. So in this section, we did have some administrative suggestions, and that would be that personal leave be not approved during the first 3 weeks of school, beginning on the first all-staff day. That's what the handbook said. Well, 12-month employees, so again, I'll use a custodian this time. What is the first all-staff day? They're here all year round. Is it when the kids come in? Is it when the staff comes in? Is it when their year starts over? And so we did define that the first all-staff day is that first all-staff day at the beginning of the year. That's something that we all know, so we wanted to recognize what that was. And then we also looked at the number of employees, it was an unintentional result of adding that third and fourth personal day. Some employees took that all at once, and that has become somewhat of a hardship when we have people gone for 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row. Sometimes it's hard enough when it's 2 days in a row, but that has been typical because that's something they have had forever, is the 2 days. And so the Employee Relations Committee did put language in there that would suggest that no more than 2 personal days can be used consecutively. And if there is a reason to consider 3 and 4 days in a row, then it would have to be for a unique situation, and it would have to be approved by both the supervisor or principal and Tim.
Can I just see? I get the personal day concern. However, it is a benefit. So you're allowing the personal day, but you're taking away the benefit of the ability to use them consecutively. I just think it doesn't feel right to me. I mean, we get personal days where I work, and as long as I have approval from my manager, just as I would take a vacation day. Is that not good enough?
I think the difference, though, is we're in the business of teaching kids, and to have a substitute, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 substitutes, covering in the classroom for 3 or 4 days in a row is really, really disruptive to what the district is all about. I mean, you know, Tim, you're a teacher. I'm sure you could attest to how difficult a situation that is if you've got to be out of the classroom for even 1 day. You know, it's not like there's another Tim waiting in the wings.
I understand, and my wife is a teacher, so I understand. However, it's a benefit, and you're restricting the benefit.
Well, they can still have their 4 days. The committee is just suggesting that on balance, you know, an employee benefit versus the mission of this organization, it's too disruptive, barring unusual circumstances, to take more than 2 days in a row. Does that fairly capture it?
Yes, and Donna, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but when we had our Employee Relations Committee meeting, you know, Donna mentioned we just didn't, it was never an intentional plan that they could be taken all at the same time. It was, it was rolled out there, and then that's what we're seeing happen. So it was an unintentional consequence. It was never really put together that way with the idea that that would be allowed.
Well, last year, the request was, could people that have a certain amount of time and have an extra day, could, instead of calling in sick, they'd like to be able to have the personal day. We thought that was actually quite reasonable, never intending that they would be using it to take a week off or a long weekend. And we do have a shortage of substitutes. It's very difficult to find good substitutes for some of these classes, and the people that end up suffering are the students.
I want to also back to what you're saying, because it is the situation right now is it is very difficult to find subs. Actually, it's been days that there's no sub, and the kid has to be split into other classrooms because there's a shortage of
Or the
teachers in
principal
general.
takes the class.
Steve, what I would say too is I have found over the years that I've been here, if there is something that is, you know, we used to use the words once in a lifetime situation that you want to take, you know, 3-4 days. The district has been very accommodating for those kinds of requests.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation.
Other questions or comments on that? Anyone? Okay.
Okay, section 60.20, funeral bereavement leave. This was administrative recommendation, and it's one of, kind of goes to what I just said about special requests. We don't ever tell someone that they can't go to a funeral. So instead of them, when it comes to a friend, we do ask that they write to Tim for permission to do that. And I mean, he never says no, and that's the right thing, I think. So we just have taken that away, you know, instead of all these letters and all this communication going to him, we're just going to ask the supervisor or principal to consider those requests, and they can be approved then within the building. Section 60.80 would be a section that we would eliminate simply because we no longer have this carrier. He retired, but it's also a very, very costly benefit. But if people are interested in looking at long-term care, I know that WEAC has plans. I'm sure there's other carriers that could offer plans. We do not have a contact any longer in the district. Sick leave credit eligibility. Again, this is administrative requests. And this is, part of this is just clarifying, last year, we have put our retirement benefits in a health reimbursement arrangement. So we're just putting that in there. It's what we do, but it wasn't in the handbook since this was new last year. And we do not do that with bus drivers. And it's mainly because most bus drivers do not qualify for insurance. And a health reimbursement arrangement, you can use that money to pay for any kind of premiums. Bus drivers would not have as many premiums that they could be paying for. So as long as we do it consistently within a group, you can have something different. So for bus drivers, we would pay them out. And we would like to ask that bus drivers retire at the end of a school year. We did have an unfortunate situation where we had a bus driver retire in the spring, and that bus drivers too, it's very, very difficult to find substitutes for these drivers, and so it would help us a lot if people could at least see it through the end of the school year. And the health reimbursement arrangement, again, this is administrative, and this is just identifying what it is. Again, it's something that was new as of, it occurred after the last handbook, and we're defining what that means and what the funds can be used for. Section 70.05 is an administrative recommendation. It's because we're changing our pay dates. Those have been communicated to staff, but it was to be in line with ETF. The reporting requirements changed there, and so this is more in line with what they're requiring as well.
Allison?
I was just thinking through the logistics of that. So then they would just get paid for 5 more days on that first check, is that?
Erica,
do you see what I
exactly
mean?
how they're handling that. The changing to the 10th and the 25th, there's some transition for people that.
Like, are the pay periods the same? It's
No,
just
the
they're
pay
getting-
periods are changing as
The pay
well.
periods change
Yes,
too.
yes.
So for that first one where this moves 5 days in advance,
It's moving 5 days back. So
Moving
we're getting
5
paid on
days
the
back.
5th, it's moving back to the 10th.
okay,
So our first paycheck will be 5 days later than what we normally experience.
right,
Are you asking
okay.
if it's going to be bigger or smaller?
Right, so is there
first
gonna be like an extra 5 days of pay on that?
No. People have known for, boy.
Well, since Christmas, I think.
Since winter, it was before winter break that we communicated this for people to plan.
So I think what Allison is asking is, we get paid June 20th.
Yep.
Then we don't get paid again until July 10th. So that first check will be a little bigger than normal because it'll have 5 extra days of working. If I'm an hourly employee, if I'm a
I would
year-round,
say
it's,
that- so, I don't know if this is necessarily true for our custodial staff, but the majority of our employees annualize their pay. So what that means is that we look, even hourly employees, we take their calendar, their scheduled hours, figure out what that would equate to, and then divide that over 24 pay periods. So that way, they get the same check every week, and if they work extra time, then that extra time is just added to their checks. So historically, what that has meant is that on July 5th, they actually were overpaid because they hadn't worked enough time to actually equate to the paycheck that they received. and by the end of the year, it annualizes itself out. So for those that have their salary annualized, the check amount will still be the same on July 10th as compared to what they would have received on July 5th.
We just have a little longer stretch.
Yep.
Just that one time, though.
Just that
Yeah,
one time,
right,
yeah.
just that one.
And like I said, people have known about this for quite a long time.
That answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, then section 70.08, this was something that one staff member asked that they'd like to see the evaluation compensation plan outlined in the handbook. Well, we're in between, I mean, we're working on that, but even if we have that, I mean, when you look at the current plan that we have, what Lynn was talking about where we would have a manual, once we get to where we're going to be, there would be a separate document, but we do think it would be good to add a section about how educators are paid using a career ladder, and then, Becky, if you could just go to W. We'll add, besides adding the section, then we can also add an appendix where we put a picture of the current career ladder in there, so that they can see that with a reference to check with their building principal or myself or the director of curriculum and instruction for further detail. Okay, we're back to Q. This really came about as a question from, well, this was made by 4 staff members. And it was asking us to honor prep time. And I will say we try to honor prep time the best that we can, but it's not 100%. We have had need where some educators, some buildings, they have had a rotational basis where they have to have gone outside to help with recess. We recognize that that's really important to them. We recognize they want to use that prep time for their planning purposes. But when it comes down to supervision, sometimes we do have to ask for their help in going outside, or sometimes even just standing outside when the buses are coming.
Or like at the high school, you could have teachers covering for other teachers when we can't get a sub.
Right, so that led us into that section. We do call on teachers from time to time if we don't have a substitute. It happens easier at the secondary level at River Bluff in the high school, where during their prep time, they can maybe go into the social studies class, and because the kids change, and the teachers change, that isn't quite the issue as it would be if it was an elementary teacher. So because they are giving up that prep time to go in and help out, our current rate of pay was $16 an hour. And so we did do a survey of what other districts are paying in the area, and we, as an Employee Relations Committee, would recommend $25 an hour for increasing that amount, which put us on the high end of the comparables when we were finding out what other districts do.
I have a question. How long is the period for a class in the middle and the high school?
I believe, Mike, is it about 55 minutes at the high school? 50 minutes at the high school,
So
and I think it's about that at River
So it's
Bluff.
about 1 hour too?
Yeah, it's under an hour.
Under an hour.
Mhm. So they would still, when it says per class period, they would get that full amount. Okay. Emergency closings, that was suggested by one EA, but I will tell you, the EAs bring this up every year during bargaining, so in all fairness, you need to know they did bring that forward, and they would like to be paid for snow days. When we don't have snow days, they'd like to get their pay. The Employee Relations Committee would not recommend making that change, but we have made changes over the years to that. If an EA is out because of a snow day, they can use personal time. We do allow them to use sick time, and we added, I think it was last year, we added the ability for them to make up the time the first day that school is out. And so this last year, we did have a snow day, and we do have some EAs coming in to work that first day after school is out. Many of them took either personal or sick time, so they were made whole. Their check was not reduced by missing that work day.
Is that the same practice for teachers then?
No.
No.
No, that's the practice for what I would call non-professional staff.
Okay.
Professional staff get paid.
Okay.
Other questions?
What's the thinking behind that? I've always wondered that. Why do they
Our
not?
thinking?
Yeah, why do they not get paid for that day?
Generally,
They
I mean, the
expect to be
thinking
here.
behind it is that they are paid for the work they do on an hourly basis. So if they're not working, they don't get paid. If they work more hours, if they're scheduled for 7 and they work 7.5, they get paid more. Where the professional staff, you have kind of a general idea of when you should be working, but if you work less, you still get the same pay. If you work more, you get the same pay. So it isn't $1 for hours of work as it would be with non-exempt.
And we've costed that out in the past, and I think it was like $16,000 a day.
Yep, that was in the notes. If we did do that, for each day that we would do that, it would cost the district over $16,000.
But from what I heard, you allow them though, if they want to just say, you can use a sick day and get paid for that day, that's
Yeah.
okay.
And
They don't get, okay.
Yep, and they can accumulate their,
And
what
they
we
can
talked about
accumulate their
before.
sick days, okay.
Mhm. All right. Job responsibilities, the reason that section is in there is because one employee asked for job descriptions to be in the handbook. Job descriptions, anyone who asks me for a job description, they get those. And it would be really difficult to put those in a handbook. First of all, there's quite a few of them, and secondly, they're a more fluid document. As responsibilities change, they can change, and so we just really didn't feel that they belonged in a handbook, but they are totally available. Electronic communication and information systems, this is primarily administrative recommendations. And we just want to be perfectly clear that when people understand that they do not have a right to privacy, that also includes email. And we have had some situations where staff members have used our information systems as an advertising tool. And I think I mentioned somewhere in the notes, we actually had someone advertise their cottage for sale up north. If anyone was interested in buying their cottage, or they're having a Pampered Chef party, let them know if you might want to order anything. All of those things are not appropriate use for district email and internet. And then we would recognize that if they have flyers, if they want us to know something about the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts, there is a flyer policy, and there is a way of getting that information out.
Becky, when you say the internet including email, is that district email or personal email as well?
District.
But if they access their personal email on a district device, they do have an expectation of privacy? Is that what you're getting at, Joe?
That was my question,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, that's a good question.
There is some law on that.
Yes, they do. Yes.
Well, we might just want to say then including district email,
Okay.
and just clean that up.
Yep. Okay, then bulletin boards is 110.15. And again, this is just if we can reference something to remind them, but those lovely blue and red, white and blue posters, those are a legal requirement to have up. And I go particularly in the elementary schools, and they're down, and there's cute paper up, and so we just have to keep reinforcing the fact that those documents have to stay up, because we could be found liable if we don't have those documents visible.
What documents are these?
Well, they're the unemployment documents. They're
Harassment, that kind of thing?
Yeah. If you go out in this
Workers'
hallway,
comp.
go down toward the bathrooms, you'll see the whole board of FMLA. There's required documents for all of that.
And they're just They're just pinned up at this point, on like a bulletin board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wonder if there's a more permanent way to just
They
display them.
change.
They change a lot.
Well, and they
They change
change
every
too, so. you
There's
know,
a whole
we're-
business around
Right.
publishing those
They
postcards.
try to
Yes.
sell
They
them
can
to you.
say slide it in.
Companies try to sell
I
it to
don't
you.
know. Okay.
Okay, then Appendix A is the benefit information. And again, these are just administrative suggestions. It's simply updating what our benefits currently are. There are no changes other than if you agree to take out the long-term care insurance information, because we don't have that. But everything else that you see there, it is simply identifying what is current, what we do. And then Becky, if you go to the next page. This section under prescription coverage, this was for under the educator early retirement benefit. This is something that we have had our educators do, but we could not. We started looking for it, and we realized it was not written in the handbook, and so we're putting in language that is a practice, but it has not been written in there. And then I already shared Appendix E was in relation to the career ladder.
So questions on any of that from anybody? So, board members, this was on for just a discussion item. This will be on a future agenda very soon. What's our deadline for decision on any changes?
It goes into effect July 1st.
So we've got to do it next month.
That'd be great, because it'll take me some time to get it updated too.
Okay. So I would anticipate that this will be on the agenda for our next regular board meeting, which is June 12th.
And if I could just say, as you go through these and think about it and read about this, if there's questions that I can answer, just shoot me an email. I'll send it to Tim so he can, with the answers, so he can send it out to all of you.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Okay, we do have 4 policies up for discussion action items. Donna, would you like to make a motion with respect to each of those?
Separately.
Yes, I think so.
I move that we approve a new policy 113, legislative liaison and other board representative as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Allison. Any discussion on adopting or not adopting that policy? We have to do this by roll call, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Becky?
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Ms. Tarpinian?
Yes.
Mr. Buban?
Yes.
Mr. Coughlin?
Yes.
Ms. Sword?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
President Dirks?
Yes. All right, that's approved. Then the next up is policy 1010, visitors.
I move that we approve the revised 1010 visitors policy as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
From Tim. Any discussion on that? Seeing none.
Mr. Coughlin?
Yes.
Ms. Sword?
Yes.
Ms. Tarpinian?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Buban?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Yes.
President Dirks?
Yes. And then policy 1017.
I have 1020, I'm sorry, I skipped that. I move that we approve the revised policy 1017 weapons as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
From Steve. Any discussion on that?
Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Buban?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Coughlin?
Yes.
Ms. Sword?
Yes.
Ms. Tarpinian?
Yes.
President Dirks?
Yes. And that's adopted. And then finally, policy 1204, volunteers.
I move that we approve policy 1204 as amended and presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Yoli. Any discussion? Seeing none.
Mr. Coughlin?
Yes?
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Ms. Tarkinian?
Yes.
Ms. Swart?
Yes.
Mr. Huban?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
President Dirks?
Yes. And that's adopted. Thank you. Finally, there are some future board meetings and other events coming up. We have board development meetings May 22nd and June 5th. I'm finalizing exactly what's going to be on each of those. We'll get that out to you as soon as we get it finalized. I anticipate that's going to be in the next day or two.
And Scott, we haven't done those since I've been on the board. Does that run roughly like a regular meeting? It's a public meeting, I take it?
They are, yeah, good question. They are public because a quorum of the board will be there.
Right.
It is not anticipated that the board will take any action. That is, we won't be voting on anything. It's for purposes of discussion, for purposes of learning about an issue. We talked last year, or maybe it was early this year, on periodically self-evaluating. That would be a time where we would do that as well.
Okay.
But yes, those are public meetings. Next regular board meeting is June 12. As Tim mentioned, high school honors night is Wednesday night. Facilities is meeting tomorrow night, and I think among other things, the 1892 building is on the agenda.
Yeah, they've asked to give an update, I think.
Okay.
Fairly quick update.
Great, great. Policy meets June 5, and graduation, big day, June 4. We will hope very fervently that it does not rain.
Right. One of the things that you will see coming out of my office is a general posting for the year, like something that's been recommended by other districts that just says that throughout the year, board members may be attending social events, athletic events, graduation parties, different things like that, that it's not a board meeting, there may be a quorum present, but it's for a social or whatnot, and no board action will be taken. Just recommendation that we just legally send it out there so that if there's board members happen to be attending a public function, somebody isn't saying, well, is this a board meeting? You're there as a citizen, you're there at a public function.
No, that's an excellent point, because I'm assuming we'll have a quorum of the board at graduation.
Right, and so, you know, taking tickets or working the first home football game and things like that. So we'll send, so when you see something put in Neptune on this, that's what that is. It's just kind of a notice to the public that for this next year, kind of covering any social events and any school events that there may be multiple board members at, so.
In the crowd at Sitting to My Parade.
Correct.
Okay. Does anybody have future agenda items that they want to suggest right now? Otherwise, you all have my email address. Okay, with that. I'm sorry?
When's next employee relations? The meeting time got moved, and now I'm not seeing it on my
Sarah's not
calendar.
here.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, I'll have to touch base
No.
with Sarah on that.
I don't know why it's not on my
I will
calendar
send
right
her
now.
an email
Okay.
to ask about that. Thanks for asking. Okay, then with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, we're done. Thank you.
Shorter.
That was the plan, Joe.